Chosen one, the distance you feel right now is not accidental. It did not sneak into your life without permission. You did not wake up one morning suddenly detached from people, from places, from routines that once felt normal by coincidence. This distance is intentional. It is measured. It is allowed. And more than that, it is meaningful. Listen carefully. What you are experiencing is not loss. It is alignment. God has stepped in and created space because if He had not, you would have remained crowded by voices, expectations, and rhythms that could no longer carry what He placed inside you. You may not be able to explain it to anyone else. You try, but the words fall flat. You just know that conversations feel shallower, rooms feel smaller, and old goals no longer excite you. Even familiar laughter feels distant. And that confuses you, because nothing is wrong on the surface. You still have a job, responsibilities, people who love you. Yet internally, something has shifted. You feel pulled back, drawn inward, as if life itself pressed pause. That pause is not punishment. That pause is preparation. Think about your daily life. At work, you show up and do what needs to be done, but your spirit feels disengaged. You complete tasks, attend meetings, hit deadlines, but there is a quiet voice inside you whispering, "This is not the full story." Not because the job is bad, but because it is no longer enough to define you. Or look at your finances. Maybe you are stable, paying bills, surviving, but the old chase for money alone feels empty. You want purpose attached to provision now. Or consider family gatherings. You love them, yet you feel like an observer, not fully understood, not fully seen. This distance is not arrogance, it is awareness. God often creates distance before He releases direction. He separates before He sends. If He revealed everything at once, you would run ahead without the strength to sustain it. So instead, He quiets the noise. He removes emotional dependencies. He lets certain connections fade not because they were evil, but because they were seasonal. And seasons change quietly, not violently. Leaves fall without making noise, yet the tree knows exactly what time it is. There is a reason you no longer fit where you used to belong. Growth always feels like discomfort before it feels like clarity. And right now, you are in that narrow space between who you were and who you are becoming. That space feels lonely, it feels uncertain, but it is sacred. This is where your inner hearing sharpens. This is where your discernment matures. This is where you stop needing constant affirmation from people and start trusting divine confirmation instead. Hear this clearly: God is not distant from you, He is close. It only feels like distance because distractions have been removed. When a room goes quiet, even a whisper becomes loud. That is what God is doing. He is lowering the volume of the world so you can finally hear Him without strain. It is written through the words of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 30, verse 15. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. Notice that strength is not promised in noise. It is promised in quietness. Yet most people run from silence because silence exposes what busyness hides. Silence reveals what distraction medicates. But you, chosen one, were built to withstand it. That is why God allowed it. He would not bring you into a quiet season if He did not trust what would rise within you there. Here is a simple, real-life picture. Imagine someone who has been running on caffeine and adrenaline for years. One day, their body forces them to stop. At first, the rest feels uncomfortable. Restlessness sets in, but slowly, healing begins. Energy returns, not artificial energy, but real strength. That is what this distance is doing for your soul. It is detoxing you from external validation and reintroducing you to internal authority. Now, let me be clear, this does not mean you isolate yourself forever. This is not abandonment. This is recalibration. You are being tuned, like an instrument, so that when you are placed back into the orchestra of life, you play the correct note. If you were to re-enter too soon, you would still be out of tune, clashing with the very calling meant for you. Hope is already forming, even if you cannot see it yet. Soon, conversations will return, but deeper ones. Opportunities will come, but aligned ones. Relationships will reappear, but purified ones. You will not have to chase them. They will recognize you, and you will recognize yourself again, stronger, clearer, calmer. So let me ask you directly, when the noise faded and the distance appeared, did you run from it, or did you listen? If this message resonates, take a moment right now to like this message. Share it with someone who feels the same unexplained distance, and subscribe so you stay connected to what God is unfolding here. And as a quiet declaration of trust, comment 77 below, not loudly, not repeatedly, just once, as a sign that you choose rest over rush, alignment over approval. The isolation you are walking through is not rejection. Even though it feels like it, it feels personal. It feels unfair. It feels like you were quietly pushed to the edge while others stayed in the center. But what if this separation is not evidence that you were left behind? What if it is proof that you are being led ahead? God does not isolate people to weaken them. He isolates them to refine their hearing, their motives, and their strength. There was a time when being surrounded by people gave you comfort. Messages, invitations, shared plans, those things once reassured you that you belonged. Now, many of those connections have thinned out. Some stopped calling. Some drifted without explanation. Others remain physically present but emotionally distant. You replay conversations wondering if you said something wrong, if you changed too much, or if you somehow failed. But the truth is quieter and deeper than self-blame. You did not lose them. You outgrew the version of yourself they were comfortable with. This kind of isolation often shows up in ordinary life. At work, you may notice you are no longer included in certain discussions. You still perform well, but you sense a gap, like your perspective doesn't fully fit the culture anymore. In family settings, you may feel like the different one. The one who doesn't laugh at the same jokes or chase the same priorities. Even financially, you may feel separated, no longer willing to take shortcuts others justify. Even if it means slower progress, these moments hurt because they feel like rejection, but they are actually invitations to integrity. God uses isolation to protect what He is building in you. If He left you surrounded by voices that pull you backward, you would constantly negotiate your calling. You would keep shrinking to stay accepted. So He allows distance not to starve you of love, but to starve insecurity of its fuel. When approval is removed, authenticity has space to breathe. There is also something else happening in isolation exposure. When no one is watching, cheering, or correcting you, what remains is who you truly are. Your prayer life becomes honest. Your fears surface without disguise. Your motivations are revealed. This can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling, because there is nowhere to hide. But this is exactly where healing begins. God cannot heal what you keep performing over. Consider a simple image. A gardener does not grow the strongest roots in crowded soil. When a plant is transplanted into its own space, the roots are forced to grow deeper to find water. Above ground, it may look smaller for a season. Below ground, it is becoming unmovable. That is you right now. What looks like stagnation is actually foundation. Hope is not absent in this season, it is just quieter. It shows up as small clarity instead of loud excitement. It shows up as peace that does not depend on people's responses. It shows up as boundaries you no longer feel guilty for keeping. Slowly, you begin to trust yourself again. You begin to sense that being alone with God is safer than being surrounded by misunderstanding. The Word of God speaks clearly through the writings of David in the Psalms. Chapter 66, on verse 10. For you, O God, tested us. You refined us like silver. Refining always involves heat, separation, and time. Silver is not rejected because it enters the fire, it is purified there. In the same way, this isolation is not a verdict on your worth, it is evidence of your value. God does not refine what He does not intend to use. You may still have moments where loneliness hits unexpectedly late at night, during a quiet commute, or when you reach for your phone and realize there is no one to text. In those moments, remind yourself this season is temporary, but its impact will be permanent. You are learning how to stand without leaning, how to listen without noise, how to belong without begging. Soon you will reconnect not out of need, but out of choice. You will recognize relationships that honor who you are now, not who you used to be. And when you step back into community, you will do so with discernment, not desperation. So let me ask you plainly if this isolation is refining you rather than rejecting you. What part of you is God asking to let go? This season is teaching you how to be steady without applause, faithful without witnesses, and obedient without immediate reward. What you are gaining inwardly right now will later save you outwardly when pressure, opportunity, and visibility all arrive at once. You are not being emptied, you are being clarified. When this chapter closes, you will step forward with fewer questions, stronger convictions, and a quieter confidence that does not need to explain itself to anyone who did not walk this road with you. When familiar voices go silent, your mind rushes to fill in the blanks. You replay messages that were never answered. You wonder why guidance that once felt constant now feels distant. And if you are not careful, you will mislabel silence as betrayal. But silence is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is instruction without noise. Sometimes it is God teaching you how to hear without leaning on echoes. The danger in this season is not the silence itself, it is what you reach for to replace it. When clarity pauses, the human instinct is to substitute. You scroll longer, you talk more, you seek opinions you never needed before. You allow voices into your life simply because they are loud, not because they are wise. That is how confusion enters quietly. Not through obvious lies, but through constant commentary that drowns discernment. Here is a practical truth you need right now. Not every unanswered message requires interpretation. Not every delay requires explanation. Some silence is simply space. Space for you to slow your reactions. Space for you to observe patterns instead of chasing reassurance. Space for God to shift your dependence from external confirmation to internal conviction. Let's make this tangible. Imagine a normal workday. You send a proposal, an idea, or a message to your supervisor or client. Hours pass, no reply. Anxiety rises, you start drafting follow-up messages in your head. You consider texting someone else for validation. You rehearse worst-case scenarios in that moment. Silence tests whether you trust your preparation or crave approval. The practical instruction is simple but difficult. Wait one full day before reacting. Do not explain. Do not apologize preemptively. Let silence finish its work. Or consider relationship. Someone who used to call daily suddenly goes quiet. Instead of immediately assuming rejection, ask yourself, what if this pause is revealing how much of my emotional stability depended on them? The instruction here is not withdrawal, it is recalibration. Continue living. Continue showing up for your responsibilities. Do not freeze your life waiting for someone else's response. Another instruction limits substitute noise. If you notice yourself constantly playing podcasts, videos, or background sound just to avoid stillness, reduce it intentionally. Choose 1 hour a day with no input, no commentary, no advice, just quiet presence. At first, your thoughts will race, then they will settle. That is when clarity begins to surface. Silence also exposes habits. In finances, for example, you may feel pressure to keep up with others because no one is affirming you're slower. Wiser choices. Don't replace silence with impulsive spending just to feel included. In family dynamics, you may feel misunderstood. Don't over-explain yourself hoping to be validated. Let consistency speak louder than defense. The goal is not to glorify isolation. The goal is to resist desperation. Desperation makes you listen to voices that have no authority over your future. Desperation makes you confuse familiarity with truth. But you are being trained to pause, to weigh, to discern. The ancient words recorded in the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, verse 2. Offer a sharp warning. Desire without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way? Haste is the enemy of wisdom in silent seasons. Silence is not asking you to decide faster, it is inviting you to decide deeper. When you rush to replace missing voices, you often adopt opinions that do not fit your calling. But when you wait, you begin to notice which thoughts bring peace and which ones bring pressure. Hope appears quietly here. You will notice that when you stop chasing replacement voices. A steady inner guidance strengthens. You begin trusting your judgment again. You start recognizing which advice aligns with your values and which only feeds fear. Slowly, confidence returns, not the loud kind, but the grounded kind. Let me offer one more practical instruction right before you speak. When confusion hits, don't immediately call someone. Write down what you are feeling and what decision you are facing. Often, clarity emerges simply by externalizing the noise. This practice trains you to process instead of panic. Now, a direct question for you when the silence arrived. Did you listen, or did you immediately look for something else to hold on to? If this resonates, leave a short comment below, no more than 4 words. Write, I choose clarity. That sentence is not for performance. It is a quiet agreement with yourself that you will not replace silence with noise, nor guidance with distraction. When you write, I choose clarity, you are declaring that you will no longer confuse noise with direction. You are choosing patience over panic, depth over distraction, and wisdom over urgency. Even when answers do not arrive as quickly as you want, that short sentence is a boundary. It tells your mind to slow down, your emotions to settle, and your spirit to stay grounded. You are reminding yourself that clarity is not chased, it is received by those willing to wait and listen. Elijah did not collapse in a palace. He collapsed in the wilderness after fire fell from heaven, after courage that confronted false prophets. After a victory that looked undeniable from the outside, he ran exhausted, overwhelmed, emptied. He sat beneath a broom tree in the desert and asked for his life to end. No crowd followed him there. No applause softened the silence. Only heat, dust, and the weight of having given everything. Yet it was precisely there, not at the peak of triumph, that restoration quietly began. God did not meet Elijah with correction. He met him with care. An angel brought food. He was allowed to sleep. His body was restored before his calling was redirected. Then Elijah walked 40 days deeper into the wilderness, far from noise and expectation. And when God finally spoke, It was not through wind, earthquake, or fire, but through a gentle whisper. That whisper did not shame him. It reassigned him. Elijah was sent back not the same, but steadier, clearer, and no longer alone. You recognize this story because it mirrors your own life more than you may admit. Your wilderness might not look dramatic. It might look like burnout after years of responsibility. It might look like emotional numbness after giving too much to work, family, or ministry. It might look like reaching a goal and discovering that the joy you expected never arrived. Like Elijah, you did what was required and still ended up tired. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. In ordinary life, this shows up quietly. You wake up already fatigued. You perform well at work but feel disconnected from meaning. Conversations feel heavier than before. You crave solitude not because you hate people, but because your soul is overstimulated and undernourished. This is not failure. This is depletion. And God does not punish depletion, He restores it. Notice the order of Elijah's healing nourishment. Rest, silence, then direction. Many people reverse this. They demand answers while ignoring exhaustion. They chase clarity while refusing rest. But God knows you cannot hear clearly when your inner life is starving. That is why this season slowed you down, not to delay you, but to stabilize you. Here is a simple image from everyday life. Think of a craftsman who has used the same tool faithfully for years. Eventually, it dulls not because it is useless, but because it has been effective. The tool must be removed from work, sharpened, restored. That pause does not mean rejection. It means value. You are not sidelined. You are being sharpened. The Spirit spoke through the prophet in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 12. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. That whisper still speaks. It speaks through the permission to rest without guilt. Through boundaries you once feared but now protect. Through clarity that arrives quietly instead of dramatically. You may notice subtle changes, your reactions soften. Your discernment sharpens. Your need to prove yourself fades. These are not signs of retreat. They are signs of renewal. Reassignment always follows restoration. Elijah was sent back with specific instruction to anoint, to prepare successors, to continue the work but not in the same way as before. His next obedience required depth, not spectacle. Presence, not performance. In the same way, what comes next for you will not demand constant striving. It will require steadiness, integrity, listening more than speaking. Hope lives here. This wilderness will not be your address, it is your training ground. You will return to people, to purpose, to responsibility, but with a different posture, less frantic, more anchored. And when pressure comes, you will not collapse as before because you learned how to be fed before being sent. Some people walk past a well in the desert and never draw water. Others recognize it as a place of renewal and return when they are thirsty again. Staying near what restores you is not obligation, it is wisdom. When something strengthens you, when it helps you breathe again, you remember the place. If this message has felt like a resting fire in your wilderness, you may choose to mark this place by liking it. Not as applause, but as quiet recognition. This helped me steady myself. If you know someone still sitting under their own broom tree, you might gently guide them here by sharing it. Not to persuade them, but to remind them that restoration is possible. And if you wish to remember the path back to this well when your strength runs low, subscribing is simply choosing to stay connected. No pressure, no demand, just a voluntary decision to remain near what nourishes instead of drains. You were never abandoned in your exhaustion. Heaven was closer than you realized, restoring you not only to continue, but to continue differently, with clarity and purpose intact. Distance has a second purpose that is harder to accept but impossible to avoid. It reveals who cannot follow you into what is next. This is not about blame. It is about truth. When the path narrows, not everyone who walked with you before is able or willing to continue. And God allows that to become visible, not to wound you, but to free you. At first, you tried to carry everyone with you. You adjusted your pace. You softened your convictions. You explained yourself repeatedly so no one would feel left behind. But the further you walked, the heavier that became. The distance you feel now is not cruelty. It is honesty. It is God quietly removing the weight of people who were connected to your past but not equipped for your future. This often shows up in very normal ways. A friend loses interest when your priorities change. A coworker becomes distant when you refuse shortcuts they still justify. A family member resists the boundaries you finally set. Nothing dramatic happens. No big argument, just a growing gap. And that gap hurts because it feels personal, but it is positional. You moved, they stayed. And love does not always mean remaining aligned. Here is where many people get stuck. They confuse loyalty with obedience. They think staying small is kindness. They think shrinking is humility. But God never asked you to betray your growth to preserve comfort. Some people are assigned to walk with you for a chapter, not the whole story. When the chapter ends, distance is how the page turns. Consider a practical situation. Imagine you are improving your financial discipline, saving, planning, saying no to impulsive spending. Suddenly, certain social invitations feel uncomfortable. Jokes are made, pressure rises. You feel tempted to compromise just to belong. That tension is not about money. It is about alignment. Distance is revealing who can respect the direction you are moving in. Or think about your inner life. You start valuing rest, silence, and purpose more than constant activity. Someone who thrived on chaos finds your calm boring. Conversations fade. Again, no villain, just different trajectories. God uses distance to show you this without arguments, without explosions, without bitterness. This is where hope becomes very real. You are not losing everyone, you are making room. Room for people who will recognize your growth without resenting it. Room for relationships that do not require you to explain your evolution. Room for companions who can walk beside you without trying to pull you back. The Apostle Paul wrote words that still echo today in the letter to the Corinthians. Chapter 15, verse 33. Do not be misled, bad company corrupts good character. This is not an accusation, it is a principle. Influence works quietly. That is why God creates distance gently. He knows confrontation would harden hearts, but separation can soften understanding over time. Distance protects what is forming in you while allowing others to remain where they are without condemnation. There may still be grief here. Let it exist. Grief does not mean you made the wrong choice. It means you valued the connection. But do not let grief turn into guilt. You are not responsible for carrying people into places they refuse to grow into. Look ahead for a moment. Picture yourself 6 months from now. You're thinking clearer, your decisions calmer, your energy steadier. Now imagine trying to maintain that while constantly justifying it to people committed to your old patterns. You see it. Don't you? Distance is mercy for you and for them. See, for God is also teaching you discernment. Not everyone who cheers for you understands you. Not everyone who stays close is meant to stay long. Distance sharpens your ability to recognize who adds weight and who adds wind to your wings. Let me ask you directly, who became uncomfortable when you started becoming honest with yourself? This section carries a quiet invitation. Not to cut people off harshly, not to harden your heart, but to accept separation without chasing. without explaining, without retreating into loneliness. Trust that what remains and what arrives will be aligned. As a quiet sign that you understand this season of separation, leave a simple comment below 318. This number represents discernment. Not everyone goes with you. Only those who are meant to. It is your way of saying, I trust God to reduce the crowd so the purpose becomes clearer. When you write 318, you are acknowledging that your journey does not require a crowd to be valid. You are agreeing that strength is not measured by how many stay, but by how clearly you can move forward with those who are aligned. That number also reflects trust. Trust that reduction is not loss, that fewer voices can bring greater focus, and that God often does his deepest work when the path narrows and only the committed remain. There comes a moment when discomfort no longer feels like pressure from outside, but tension from within. Nothing dramatic changes around you, yet everything feels tighter. Conversations feel repetitive, environments feel constraining. Expectations that once motivated you now irritate you. This is not rebellion. This is expansion. Your spirit has grown, and the rooms you are standing in no longer match its dimensions. Most people misunderstand this phase and label it ingratitude. They tell themselves, I should be content, even as their soul quietly suffocates. But growth always creates friction with containers that were built for an earlier version of you. The discomfort you feel is not because something is wrong, it is because something is too small. This shows up clearly in daily life. At work, you may notice that tasks feel mechanical. You are capable of more, but the structure does not allow it. You are not bored. You are underutilized. In finances, you may realize that survival thinking no longer fits you. You want stewardship, not scrambling. In family roles, you may feel pressure to remain who you were, even though you have matured beyond that identity. These tensions are signals, not sins. Here is the truth: many avoid staying in a space that no longer fits will eventually cost you your peace. You can force yourself to adapt for a while. You can numb the discomfort with routine, distraction, or obligation. But eventually, the misalignment becomes too loud to ignore. God allows that unease because it is safer than stagnation. A cramped room is uncomfortable, but it also pushes you to look for a door. Expansion is rarely celebrated by those who benefit from your smallness. When you outgrow a role, people who depended on that version of you may resist. They may question your motives. They may minimize your growth. Not because you are wrong, but because change disrupts familiarity. This is why God often handles expansion internally before he rearranges things externally. He strengthens your resolve before he opens the next space. Think of a child outgrowing a pair of shoes. At first, the shoes still work. The child can walk, run, function, but over time, pain develops. Movement becomes awkward. Damage occurs if the shoes are not replaced. The solution is not to blame the child for growing. The solution is to change the container. Your current discomfort is simply evidence that growth has occurred. Hope appears when you stop trying to make old rooms stretch. You begin to accept that not everything needs closure, some things need transition. You don't have to burn bridges. You don't have to explain everything. Sometimes, you simply walk towards spaces that allow you to stand upright again. This season also teaches you discernment about timing. Outgrowing does not always mean leaving immediately. It means preparing wisely, strengthening skills, clarifying values, listening carefully. God often expands you internally long before he relocates you externally. That delay is not denial, it is preparation. The ancient words recorded in the book of Isaiah, chapter 54, verse 2. Speak directly into this moment. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Notice that enlargement is intentional. Stretching requires effort. Holding back feels safer, but it keeps you confined. God is not rushing you, but He is inviting you to acknowledge your growth honestly. You are allowed to want more alignment. You are allowed to seek environments that match your maturity. You are allowed to release what no longer fits without shame. As this realization settles, something subtle shifts inside you. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop forcing enthusiasm. You start honoring your limits and your longing. That is not selfishness. That is stewardship of the life you have been given. Soon you will recognize new rooms by how you breathe in them. Peace returns. Curiosity awakens, energy flows instead of leaks. You do not feel the need to shrink, perform, or over-explain. You are present, grounded, able to grow without resistance. This is not the end of where you have been, it is the beginning of where you fit. And when you step fully into that space, you will realize that the discomfort was never your enemy. It was the signal that you were ready to move. What once felt like restlessness will soon feel like readiness. You will recognize that the tension was not trying to break you, but to wake you up to the fact that remaining still would cost more than moving forward with intention and trust. As clarity increases, fear will lose its authority. You will stop asking whether you are allowed to grow and start asking where your growth can be honored. Developed and used without apology or self-betrayal. When the door finally opens, you will not rush through it. You will walk with steadiness, carrying the wisdom learned in small rooms, ready to expand without losing yourself in the space you were prepared to enter. There is a moment after long distance, long silence, long becoming when you realize you are no longer waiting. Not because everything has arrived, but because you have arrived. You are no longer trying to return to who you were before the separation. You understand now that version of you could not have carried what is coming next. The distance you felt was never meant to estrange you from life. It was meant to mark you. Like a traveler who crosses fire-marked ground, you emerge changed, not louder, not harder, but weighted. You carry less noise, less need, less urgency to prove. What remains is presence, authority without announcement, peace without explanation. You see it in ordinary moments. A conversation that once would have triggered you now passes without reaction. A delay that once caused panic now feels neutral. An opportunity appears. And instead of rushing, you discern. You are no longer driven by fear of missing out, because you trust that what is meant for you will recognize you. This is what it means to return marked, not familiar. People may notice it before you name it. They may say you seem calmer, clearer, harder to read. Not because you are closed, but because you are centered. You no longer leak energy trying to be understood. You choose when to speak, where to invest, what to carry, and that is not distance from people, that is proximity to yourself. Your work begins to shift. You no longer tolerate environments that feed anxiety as motivation. You seek spaces where excellence and peace can coexist. In finances, you stop chasing numbers as proof of worth and start building stability as an act of wisdom. In family and relationships, you love more honestly. Without over-functioning or self-erasure, you are present, not performative. There is a quiet confidence growing in you now. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that others feel when they are around you. It comes from having survived the stripping without losing your core, from having sat in silence without substituting noise, from having walked alone without hardening your heart. The ancient words recorded in the letter to the Roman, chapter 8, verse 37. Speak into this return. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Notice it does not say you conquer by force. You conquer through endurance, through obedience, through love that holds you steady while everything else is rearranged. You did not conquer by outrunning the distance. You conquered by letting it do its work. What comes next will not look like chaos. It will look like alignment. Doors opening without striving, connections forming without chasing, assignments arriving with confirmation instead of confusion. You will still face challenges, but you will face them as someone anchored, not reactive. And here is the invitation hidden in this moment. Some messages are like signposts on a long road. You pass them, nod, and keep moving. Others are like fires at night, places you choose to stop. Warm your hands and remember your direction. If this message has felt like one of those fires, you may decide to tend it. Liking this message is like adding a piece of wood to that fire. Not for visibility, but to keep warmth alive for yourself and others who arrive cold. Sharing it is like lifting a lantern along the path, not to force direction, but to say, you are not lost. Someone else has walked this stretch too. Leaving a comment is like carving a mark into the trail, a quiet way of saying, I was here. I made it through. I am still walking. And subscribing is choosing to keep this fire within reach. Not obligation, not pressure. Just a voluntary return to what feeds your spirit when the journey grows long again. You are no longer defined by the distance you felt, but by what that distance produced. Discernment, depth, stability. Fire that does not flicker under pressure. You did not disappear. You were forged. What once felt like separation will now feel like discernment. You will no longer interpret distance as loss, but as guidance, an inner signal reminding you when to step closer and when to remain still. Anchored in what you have already learned, your pace will change. Not slower from fear, not faster from pressure, but steadier from understanding. You will move with intention, trusting that what belongs to you does not need to be chased, forced, or defended endlessly. There will be moments when others do not recognize the version of you that has emerged. Let that be. You are not required to translate your transformation into language everyone can accept or understand. Carry forward quietly. Let your decisions speak. Let your peace testify. And when the path opens wider, you will walk it without hesitation, knowing the distance behind you was never empty, but formative. And now, there is nothing left to push, nothing left to prove. The path does not end here, it simply becomes quieter. What you take with you from this message is entirely yours to choose. You do not owe it agreement. You do not owe it attention. You only owe yourself honesty. If these words helped you name something you could not explain before, let that clarity stay with you. Carry it into your next conversation. Carry it into your next decision. Carry it into the moments when distance returns and you are tempted to doubt yourself again. You will remember distance is not absence, and silence is not loss. If some part of this touched you, one sentence, one image, one truth, hold on to that alone. You do not need to carry everything. Growth is not about accumulation, it is about integration. What is meant for you will stay. The rest can pass without resistance. And if this message feels like something that could steady another person who is quietly struggling, you may choose to share it, not as a declaration, not as a recommendation. Simply as a gesture, like setting a glass of water down for someone who may be thirsty later. But if it does not resonate, that is allowed too. You are free to walk away with only what feels true and leave the rest untouched. Wisdom never demands agreement. It only offers perspective. This ending is open because your journey is still unfolding. There is no final instruction here, no conclusion to force meaning, only a pause, a breath, a moment to notice where you are now compared to where you were when you began listening. Whatever comes next for you, move gently. Trust what has been shaped in you through distance. And remember, you are not behind, you are not lost, and you are not late. You are exactly where learning turns into quiet strength. The rest of the story will be written in how you walk forward from here.